What's up everyone, Holly Wolf here once again with another video for our top 5 cancelled games series. After covering Zelda and Mario, many of you have been asking for games from the Pokemon series, Metroid, Mother, and other series, and we will make dedicated videos to those specific franchises soon, but for now, to try and please everyone, we decided to focus on cancelled or unreleased Nintendo games instead of one specific series. If you're a fan of this series, please like and comment below to let us know what games you would like to see us focus on in the future. Then be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on new episodes.
Probably the most well-known on our list, Zelda Ura was the original idea for what Ocarina of Time would be. It would have been completely different from what we ended up with. Originally, Miyamoto had no real idea of what the Nintendo 64 was capable of. His first concept of Zelda 64 would take place entirely inside a castle, similar to Super Mario 64. However, during development, he quickly learned the Nintendo 64 was capable of much more than he originally thought. His vision of the game changed to a much larger connecting overworld instead of being confined within a single castle. The Nintendo 64 DD was also in development and would have added even more processing power for games. Development of Ocarina of Time changed yet again to not only take advantage of the Nintendo 64, but the extra memory on the disc and processing power of the disc system. After the original adventure ended, the Ura expansion would have given you more quests, dungeons, items, weapons, bosses, NPCs, areas, and everything else you could imagine. It was literally designed to basically create a second game to be played using the original world of Ocarina of Time. Imagine something similar to BS Zelda or A Link Between Worlds. The game would have added in a full ice dungeon and a wind temple that were ultimately scrapped. The wind temple was reworked into the forest temple, which is why the medallion for it resembles wind and not a leaf. Even the forest sections of Ganon's castle at the end of the game uses wind puzzles instead of elements found within the actual forest temple. The ice dungeon was shortened and made into the ice cavern. It's thought that completing it would have unfrozen Zora's domain, considering its close proximity to Zora's domain, and completing other dungeons restored those areas that they were connected to. As no way exists to restore Zora's domain, it's thought that this idea, among others, were scrapped. Some fans also think that the light medallion would have been received after an actual light temple, as opposed to being presented it to you after becoming an adult. From early gameplay and screenshots, we can see that the medallions were actually equipable, which leads some to believe that the fire, ice, and light medallions would have been used to create fire, ice, and light arrows, or that the fire medallion would have been used instead of Din's fire. The spiritual stones would have been placed inside the Ocarina of Time as opposed to the pedestal to open the door of time. The use of time would have played a huge role in the game. A 7-day cycle would have been possible because of the disk drive's internal clock. Some believe that this was only for Majora's Mask's beta, but some do believe that this idea was meant for Ocarina of Time as well. This was later moved to Majora's Mask, or Zelda Gaiden as it was known early on the 64 disk drive, before being cut to only 3 days as the 64 disk drive was a commercial flop. Honestly, the list of changes is way too long. We could easily make an hour-long video just talking about what Zelda Ura could have been. Even though Miyamoto has said that the game was fully completed, it was never actually released. He would later say that ideas and concepts from the game would later be used in future releases. One scrapped idea, such as Link swinging his sword while riding Epona, couldn't be achieved on the original 64 hardware and wouldn't be used until Twilight Princess 8 years later, which is why a big part of the game is horseback combat. Even the final boss fight makes use of it, so it's likely scrapped ideas are still making their way into Zelda games to this day. In fact, Aonuma recently revealed that the new way of storytelling in Breath of the Wild came from plans that went unused 20 years ago. And what Zelda game was he working on 20 years ago? Ocarina of Time, which began development around 1995 and was released in 1998. Which Aonuma served as designer and director of. In an interview, he stated, "In order to create more of a cohesive storyline, we added this element in there that would make it a bit more streamlined for every player. This is something I can't reveal right now, but when you play it, you'll find out. This idea that I'm talking about is actually something I came up with when I first started developing the games. I have been harvesting this idea for 20 plus years. Finally, it is important to know that Miyamoto has gone on record stating that Master Quest for the GameCube was in fact what Zelda Ura would have been. However, I believe that this was just a way to please fans who were let down from the promise of a second quest for Ocarina of Time, as interviews, screenshots, and gameplay from Ocarina of Time clearly shows and reveals much more than what was in Master Quest, such as the sword beams and Miyamoto stating that more dungeons would be added to the game.
While many cancelled games on this list are looked as a tragedy for the gaming industry, I believe one of the biggest missed opportunities would be Pocket Monsters RPG or Pokemon RPG for the Nintendo 64 disk drive. The first mention of the game would come out during an interview in June of 1997 with Shigeru Miyamoto, but not much info was given other than confirming that it was in development. During a second interview months later, Miyamoto and Ishihara confirmed 3 different Pokemon titles were in development for the 64 disk drive, the first of which, obviously being Pokemon RPG, Miyamoto previously mentioned. The second game being Hey You Pikachu, which was reworked to play on the standard Nintendo 64, and a third game, Pokemon Snap, which was also moved to the 64. Some believe Pokemon RPG must not have been as far along as the others, so instead of moving it to work on the standard Nintendo 64 like the previous Pokemon games, the game was just cancelled and the development team moved on to a new game. It is thought certain assets, such as the battle system and 3D Pokemon models, made its way into Pokemon Monster Stadium, which went unreleased outside of Japan. During an interview with Miyamoto, he said that he wanted to use the disk drive to copy certain elements from the Game Boy Pokemon games to change parts of the console games. The CD would work between several different games, allowing you to presumably use your Pokemon on Silver and Gold to trade to Pokemon RPG. The full interview goes as follows.
Miyamoto. Not a game that only works on a single cartridge, but a disk of game data that can be used as is across several games. It means that several games have a common link between them. It's not confined to one package. They're each related. So, we mentioned Pokemon, didn't we? So you can play the Pokemon Game Boy cartridge on the 64 disk drive. We're considering adapting for not just Pokemon Gold and Silver, but all of the versions, and allowing players to perform tune-ups on games through the 64 disk drive, and change the structure of gameplay. For example, when people buy Macintosh computers, they all start out identical, but as time goes on, each person's Mac becomes a different computer. So you add on different data and create your own unique games. We're considering setting one package at 6,000 yen and making it like a collectible set of baseball cards. Players can pick and choose what they like to build their own original kit out of the compilation of different sets of parts. Writing your own data like that is what makes media like the disk drive so convenient. Although a Pokemon game for the 64 disk drive never released, fans were able to move Pokemon from the Game Boy games to Pokemon Stadium. Many fans believe the original concept of Pokemon RPG would be changed into Pokemon Colosseum and Gale of Darkness on the GameCube. However, they followed their own formula, instead of that of a traditional Pokemon game. We wouldn't see the full concept of what Pokemon RPG could have been until Pokemon Sun and Moon, which used traditional 3D character models like the GameCube titles, but followed the traditional formula that began with Pokemon Red and Green.
Banjo III. Our third pick isn't necessarily a Nintendo IP, but the Banjo series is most commonly remembered as one of the best exclusives on the Nintendo 64. Although now official HD remasters are playable on the Xbox 360 and Xbox One. At one point, its developer Rare was one of the best developers working for Nintendo in a partnership that produced several great games. Most notably, the Donkey Kong Country series, Banjo Kazooie, Perfect Dark, and many others. It's a shame Nintendo didn't lock down a deal with them before Microsoft did. If they would've, this game may have actually been released. Banjo Kazooie and Banjo Tooie were both prime examples of what 3D platformers should have been. Many people have even put it on par with Super Mario 64. In fact, it did so well The single game was quickly turned into a series. Banjo Tooie released just 2 years later, which also sold well enough for Rare to make a third. Not much info is actually known about Banjo III, as it was cancelled during development. The third Banjo was teased by Gruntilda at the end of Banjo Tooie, where she says she'll be back. Early footage of a tech demo was shown off during Nintendo's Space World 2000. During the video, Banjo and Kazooie can be seen being chased by a large group of enemies. Other Rare games that never made it to release were also shown off during the trailer, such as Rare's Donkey Kong Racing, but we'll get into that another time. The short clip was basically just to show off the power of the GameCube, by having as many moving characters on the screen with a much more detailed world than the N64 game. But about 2 years after Space World, Rare was bought out by Microsoft, and many of the games that were in development for Nintendo GameCube were either scrapped or reworked for the Xbox. We wouldn't see anything Banjo related until 2006, where another trailer for a third Banjo game was released. This time showing off a short scene of Banjo using Kazooie to open a door. Though the character model was closer to what we would see in Nuts and Bolts instead of the original design for the first tech demo. The third Banjo game would finally be launched in 2008 on the Xbox 360, 8 years after the first teaser trailer for the GameCube. The simple character design isn't the only thing that would have changed from the original concept. It is thought that most of the game had been scrapped, and an entirely new game was built from the ground up to take full advantage of the much more powerful Xbox 360. Years after the release of Nuts and Bolts, information about a planned Banjo X surfaced, with one developer even sharing character models of the game. It's thought that after Microsoft purchased Rare, sometime around 2004 to 2005, Banjo III was reworked into a remake of the original title with slight differences. After this, the project would again be reworked into Nuts and Bolts.
Metroid has had a few cancelled games in its series, probably the most famous of which being Metroid Dread for the DS, but I want to focus on a lesser known Metroid for 3DS, while never entering what I would call official production. In 2015, the website Nintendo Everything revealed that several sources had confirmed the game, with another unrelated mention of the game coming from a forum user who said, "Mercury Steam is making the new Metroid. How do I know it? Because I'm a 3D artist and I made the interview 1 week ago in Spain. Also, 2 friends who worked with me in Gameloft already moved to Mercury this month." Mercury Steam, the studio behind Konami's Castlevania Lords of Shadow series, has been pitching a new entry in the Metroid series to Nintendo. After extensive digging and coordinating with contacts related to the project, we can now confirm this to be the case. Mercury Steam is said to have pitched a new Metroid game to Nintendo. In May of that year, the development team expanded by hiring new talented developers to begin work on the game. Rumors of the game are thought to have began being leaked because of information given during this hiring process. Nintendo ended up turning down the project, likely due to them either not liking the direction of the game, or because they were working on their own Metroid game for the 3DS, and didn't want to have 2 games competing. Soon after the game was rejected by Nintendo, Mercury Steam ended up letting staff go. Soon after, an update on their official website was posted which teased a new game. It showed a man in a cockpit of a spaceship smoking a cigar with a brief description: exploring new worlds, fighting strange new creatures, discovering new heroes, expecting news soon. It is likely that after Nintendo rejected the idea, the company replaced the characters, changed the story, and converted it to a new original IP. Similar to what Nintendo did with Star Fox Adventures, except backwards. That game began as a new IP called Dinosaur Planet, but was reworked into a Star Fox game. Nintendo went on to release their own Metroid game for Nintendo 3DS. In an interview with Reggie, he mentioned that he knows Metroid Federation Force isn't the Metroid game that fans are wanting, which I take as a hint or a small nod to fans that Nintendo is actually working on a new Metroid game that the fans do want. Hopefully. Before we get to our final video, it's time for some honorable mentions. Nintendo has had so many cancelled or unreleased games that it would be impossible to list them all, but this just means a follow-up video is inevitably coming in the future. But for now, I feel that these games deserve a mention. Super Mario 64 2, which you can find out more about in a previous video discussing cancelled Mario games. Zelda 3, that was not a Link to the Past, but Miyamoto's original idea for the third Zelda game, which he states was actually completed and waiting to be released. You can learn about that in our top 5 cancelled games dedicated to the Zelda franchise. We have Metroid Dread, which could have been an awesome 2D DS Metroid title. The most bizarre of games on this list, and likely the closest to making it on the official list, is Harry Potter. I'm a pretty big Harry Potter fan, so when I found out Nintendo actually tried to get the rights for Harry Potter in order to begin working on a video game series, I was pretty surprised. This was back in 1998, and some believe that if Nintendo had actually succeeded, it could have potentially prevented those movies from being made. While the games could have ended up being better than the EA series or the LEGO games, I can't imagine a world without the Harry Potter films. Our last honorable mention is Star Fox 2, which was designed for the Super Nintendo, and like the original, made use of the Super FX chip. The game was mostly finished and has shown up online since, but was never officially released.
Last on our list, the original Mother 3, or as some people remember it, Earthbound 64. There's so much information to learn about this title, so I may do a full video on this game in the future, similar to one that I have planned that will go over the entire history of Zelda Ura. And if you would like me to go in depth on a single specific game in the future, let me know which games you would like to see videos on in the comments below. And remember to subscribe so you don't miss out. In 2006, we did see the release of Mother 3 on the Game Boy Advance in Japan. Sadly, as of right now, fans are still waiting for an official worldwide release, which some are hoping will happen soon as an eShop title on the Nintendo Switch. However, Mother 3 for the Game Boy Advance, although technically unreleased for most of the world, isn't what I'm talking about here. Earthbound 64 is the focus, which is what you could consider the beta of Mother 3. But even more interestingly, the 2006 Game Boy Advanced game actually began production in 1994 for the Super Famicom, or what most of the world knows as the Super Nintendo. Not much information is known on this early version, but I presume it would have made use of the Super FX chip, which is found inside certain games like Super Mario RPG and Star Fox, to allow for more graphically demanding games. With the success of Mother 1 and 2, production of the game first began after the success of Mother 1 and 2. Miyamoto allowed series developer Toei to create a team to start the development process of Mother 3 in 1994. The game quickly moved development to the Nintendo 64, and just like almost every game Nintendo developed on the Nintendo 64, was planned to make use of the 64 disk drive. Okay, I'm just going to say it. I love Nintendo. My YouTube channel is pretty much dedicated to talking about Nintendo, but I have absolutely no idea why Nintendo 64 was released by Nintendo like it was. Don't get me wrong, I love the console, but their reasoning behind it doesn't make too much sense. They wanted to save money and control production of their own cartridges, but they ended up releasing a disc system anyways. Not only did it allow for larger games because it was being played off of a disc, but it also added extra processing power and more features. Almost every notable game Nintendo released was originally designed to work with the 64 disk drive. So why did Nintendo release the original console without a disk drive and with less processing power than they originally intended? They ended up losing a ton of money due to manufacturing and marketing costs, which is why they didn't release it outside of Japan. If you add in the design, manufacturing costs, with the extra development time that went into cancelled or unreleased games because of poor disk drive sales, and the fact that many third-party developers like Square only released games on PlayStation because the Nintendo 64 didn't originally have a disk system, Nintendo made one of the worst business decisions ever, especially considering they ended up releasing the disk system anyways, which means Final Fantasy VII could have released on the console it was originally designed for, which is another, although third-party, cancelled Nintendo game. Anyways, back to Mother 3 or Earthbound 64. The development team seen what was being done with Super Mario 64 and decided to create a similar game that, in its own way, would revolutionize the gaming industry. This early Nintendo 64 version was too much for the hardware to actually handle. So, graphic detail, story, world size, and everything else was reworked to run on the Nintendo 64 disk drive. At E3 in June 1997, 3 years after development began, Miyamoto speculated that Mother 3 would be one of the 4 titles for the then expected 1998 launch of the 64 disk drive. But the game was instead converted to a Nintendo 64 cartridge-only format after the disk drive was seen as a failure. This meant for the third time, the game had to be reworked, this time scaled down once again to work on the original Nintendo 64 hardware. The game would go on to be shown for the first time, to my knowledge, at the 1999 Space World. IGN described it as very far along and half complete. In April of 2000, they made the comment that it was safe to assume the game was nearing completion. However, Nintendo chose not to show off the game at 2000's E3. After being silent on the development of the game, Nintendo announced the game would be released on a 256 megabit cartridge, similar to the one used for Ocarina of Time. Iwata, producer of Mother 3, ended up canceling the game just before Space World 2000, and Toei publicly confirmed the cancellation in late August of the same year. Iwata stated that the game was cancelled due to Nintendo moving forward with the development of games for the GameCube. Developers who worked on the game estimated about 60% of the game was completed. They said that Mother 3 supervisors had wanted to cancel the project since 1999, but later changed sides and said that cancellation would be wasteful. They discussed bringing the game to their forthcoming GameCube, which Miyamoto felt would have solved most of the Nintendo 64's hardware issues, which led to Mother 3 being scaled back. Miyamoto and Iwata also discussed releasing the game on the Game Boy Advance, but realized it would take just as much time, with 40 to 50 staff members, to make such a game. In retrospect, Iwata wondered out loud in an interview why the game needed to be in 3D when Toei's greatest talents lies in worlds, and thought energy poured into making a 3D game might have been a poor choice. He said he felt genuinely ashamed, and acknowledged that they were both caught up in the 3D obsession and felt obligated at the time. At the time of its cancellation, Toei predicted that Mother 3 would remain a story that only the game's staff would know, but Miyamoto was still interested in bringing the game to fruition. Mother 3 was later announced in 2003 to have restarted development for the Game Boy Advance handheld console in a Japanese commercial for Mother 1 and 2. Toei had earlier assumed that restarting the project was impossible, but later decided to continue following encouragement from the Mother fanbase. Nintendo's subsidiary company Brownie Brown developed the game with input from Toei. While the graphics were changed from 3D to 2D, the game's original story was not altered. Mother 3 was about 60% complete by July of 2004. After its initial conception on the Super Famicom in 1994, being moved to the Nintendo 64 around 1995 or 1996, then scaled down to take advantage of the 64 disk drive for release in 1998, scaled down once again to run on original Nintendo 64 hardware, and talks about moving the game to the GameCube, Mother 3 finally released as a 32-bit game on the Game Boy Advance in 2006, 22 years after beginning development, and is still unreleased outside of Japan. I want to thank you all for watching this video and welcome to the End Slate. If you're a fan of these videos, please subscribe and comment below to let me know your thoughts. If you would like to support this channel, please consider supporting on Patreon, where you can watch videos like this early and help me create longer videos like the top 10 best and worst of Ocarina of Time, Breath of the Wild, and the top 5 official Zelda games that have either been cancelled or just went unreleased. Finally, a huge thank you to this month's supporters: George Says Hi, Link Uses the Triforce, Transcendent Sacred Courage, Glenn Cassio, Prey Warrior, Victopedia, Rusty Caulfield, Robert W., Amanda Pina, Lunarium, Chris Gasparin, Harris Priest, Lovable Christie, Key of Time 15, Jerome Measure, Daryl Quinnen, Furzin 16, Kadron, Magic Tech Review, and The Itch Network.